You're listening to the Healthy Creative Ministry podcast with Matt Curtis. This is the podcast that helps you take your creative ministry from wherever you are today to healthy and effective.
Who should manage this, comm or ministry? That's a pretty vague question. I've made it more vague on purpose. The original question was, who should be managing social media in your church? Should it be comm or should it be ministry? Now, the reason I wanted to make it more broad is because I have actually found this question to be asked about a lot of different areas of what we do in creative ministry. We're going to talk a little bit about where this issue shows up. Before we jump into the episode, though, I want to give a shout out to whoever it is that's listening in Germany. I love looking through the analytics on the podcast, and there's someone in Germany that keeps downloading each week. I love that. I mentioned, I think it was last week, that my dad taught at a seminary on his sabbatical. He was a professor at Biola University, and on his sabbatical, he would teach at a seminary in the Netherlands, in Bad Hoeverdorp, Tyndale Theological Seminary. So anytime he would go over, our family would go over, and I have many fond memories spending time in Germany at various different points of my life growing up. When I see that stat, I love it. It makes me super excited. Shoot me an email, matt@lunchtimeheroes.co. I would love to hear about what's going on in Germany, what you're doing there, the ministry that you're involved in. So thank you for listening, but also shoot me an email. Let's connect. I'd love to chat through what's going on in your ministry. I'm actually going to broaden that out. No matter where you're listening from, I would actually love to hear about the ministry that you're serving in. Shoot me an email and tell me about what's going on. Tell me about the ministry that you serve in. I'd love to be able to pray specifically for you and just hear about the stuff that God's doing, the way that God's working. And maybe this is a question, the one we're answering today, maybe this is a question that you face in your ministry. And so my hope is that this is helpful for you as you navigate what the right place of comm is in some of these overlapping areas where ministry leaders are thinking, well, maybe we should be involved in it. So let's talk about where these things show up. The three areas that I have seen this most in my own personal experience has been social media. It's been graphic design, last-minute projects particularly, but in some cases it's just projects, not just last-minute ones. And then video projects. In fact, this was probably the wildest of all the scenarios. We had a video person on our staff, and their job was to create videos for the ministries, for the overarching ministry of the church, not just kids ministry or students, but also if we had a new series coming out or if we had a bumper video or a special promotion for something. We had somebody on our team, and their job was to navigate those things and to execute. One of our ministries came to us and asked for an ongoing project, something that would continually be recorded. If I remember right, it was at least once a month, but it might have even been more than that. And the reality is we just couldn't dedicate that much of our resources toward one ministry ongoing. We really needed to be able to serve more than just that one ministry. So we had that conversation and we said, look, this isn't something that we're going to be able to sustain. We're happy to do it once, but this can't be an ongoing ministry solution. So we move on from that. Everything's fine. One day I'm walking through the office and I notice a new person who'd been added to the team, and they had iMovie up on the computer. And I remember thinking to myself, iMovie? Trying to think if there's a reason as to why someone would have iMovie up in the ministry. Now, I don't understand why that's up. So I did a little bit of digging, had some conversations. It turned out that this department actually hired someone and then gave them video as part of the job once they brought him onto the team. Well, that was not kosher. That was not the way that we solved those problems. And so it ended up becoming a much larger conversation, and it actually ended up leading to some pretty significant shifts in terms of what this person's role ended up being on the team. Now, I bring that up because this is a perfect example of the tension of this question. Well, who should manage this? Should comm manage it or should ministry manage it? So these are areas where it comes up. Again, these are areas where I've seen it personally. But what I found is that the initial conversation isn't just about should comm manage this or should we. It's usually an indicator of something else below the surface. And for many years, I didn't recognize that there was this below the surface problem. So I just operated in this, well, I don't know, I could see pros and cons for each of these teams managing it. I'm not sure what the right answer is. It wasn't until I got to the point where I realized, oh, this is actually an indicator of something else. So if you're asking the question, or if your ministry team is asking the question, hey, I think I think maybe we should be managing this, or I don't know if COM should be managing this. There's a good chance that there's actually something else going on. I want to elevate some of these behind the scenes issues because those are the things that actually usually spark the debate. And the tension here is that unless you address those, you're never really going to solve this problem. You're actually going to create new problems. We ran into this often. We created a blog for one of our ministry teams. They came to us and they said, we really want to have a blog. My thought was, well, I guess we'll just give them a blog. You'll be shocked to know that after 2 posts, they stopped blogging. Well, okay, that's because I didn't do a good job of understanding what the real issue was behind this request. The first issue that tends to spark this question is when COM's not delivering. A lot of times what happens is a ministry wants to do certain things, and COM has to be the pass-through because it's the COM team. They're supposed to be in charge of this. But then COM doesn't deliver. And there's a lot of reasons as to why that happens. Some of that is a problem with deadlines. We're missing our deadlines. Ultimately, that comes back to being a systems problem. If you're familiar with the 4 creative cores language that I like to use, missing deadlines, that's a systems problem. That means that our COM team doesn't have effective systems. Maybe the COM team is not producing quality work. So you are delivering, your systems are working, but your work isn't very good. And the ministry leaders don't think that it represents their ministry well or wish that it would look different. That would be a skills problem. My recommendation on any of these things is go to healthychurchcreatives.com and take the health assessment. This is a health assessment I've built, and it's specifically to elevate some of these issues. Where is the problem? Is it with systems? Is it with skills? Is it with something else? That assessment will give you the answer. Another common issue here when it comes to COM not delivering, ministry leaders, they just have a different vision. So in some cases, you could say that's a hard issue. In other cases, it's just a control issue. There are plenty of ministry leaders that just want control over the visual representation of their ministry. The tension, of course, is that if you have a communications team, that means that your organization has decided to invest in this, and it means that your organization expects that somebody is monitoring this stuff and governing it. That is the role of a communications team. The job is to manage the visual communication, the verbal communication too, in a lot of regards. Obviously, you're not writing the sermons or things like that, but your job is to manage so many of these things. If a ministry leader wants control, that's the issue that's below the surface, and that needs to be dealt with. A couple other things beyond COM not delivering that tend to come up here that are really these real issues below the surface. Ministry wants more than the organization's willing to allocate. This is exactly what happened with the video projects for us. Leadership said, no, we don't want to hire a second video person whose job is just to work for this one department. Okay. That's the decision that leadership is making. And so that's the decision. Well, the issue, of course, is that as our organization wasn't willing to allocate these internal resources towards this problem, the ministry request was too big. We couldn't fulfill that. That means that the answer is no. That doesn't mean pull some budget dollars out of some other thing or restructure your own staff. That's not the right way to handle that problem. But that's a real thing that needs to get addressed. And here's the issue. If you don't address that ever, if the ministry leader wants more than the organization is willing to allocate, then you're going to always have this conversation. See, this is why this is such an important thing to get to, these under the surface questions. Because let's say that you're able to figure out how to manage all these videos. There's going to be another request. There's going to be something else coming down the road that's going to be a stretch of your resources and bandwidth as a team. That's just the nature of how these things work. There has to be a limit defined. So this is the issue under the surface that you have to address. And then the other common one that I want to bring up here is that ministry wants to minister to the people of their ministry. A minister doesn't want to feel like they have to go through an operations team in order to reach the people that they're called to minister to. In a lot of ways, this makes so much sense. You don't want to have an unnecessary intermediary. So if my job is to go and tell my graphic designer something, I shouldn't have to go to a third party, tell that person to then go tell the graphic designer. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And so if COM is going to be in between the ministry leader and the people that they're ministering to, that is an incorrect positioning of COM. When it comes to ministry leaders wanting to minister to their people, I find that the conversation tends to swirl around social media. And it's a really interesting conversation at the moment because several years ago, that was an okay place for ministry to happen. Meaning, If you have a group of people that are following you on social media, you're going to be able to communicate to that group of people. That's the way that the algorithm worked. Now, I actually almost feel like if people are following you, there's a lower chance that they're going to see your content. And that's probably not right, but it sure feels that way sometimes. In our current state of the way that the algorithm functions, a ministry leader managing their own social media account as a department, it actually is a really not effective way to minister to the people they're trying to reach. They're not even going to see the messages in a lot of cases. There are much better ways to solve the problem. And really, that's the point of going this layer deeper. We hear these questions come up, who should manage it? But now we're beginning to look a little bit below the surface here to understand what the true problems are. I want to give you some questions that have been really helpful for me over the years in terms of unearthing what some of these real problems are. Because at the end of the day, if you don't define the problem correctly, you're going to solve the problem incorrectly. That's just the way it goes. You can't solve the right problem by attacking the wrong problem. It just doesn't make sense. So we need to get to this reality. What exactly is going on? I say manage reality often, and this is exactly what I mean by that. Ministry leader comes to me and says, Matt, I want to manage social media. Okay, why do you want to manage social media? I really want to minister to the people that are in my ministry. So social media is not the best solution for you. Let's build you a solution that's a better one, that's actually going to be more effective. So we're managing reality. The real problem is I need to communicate with the people that I'm ministering to. I agree with you 100%. I don't know a communications leader that would disagree with that. But we need to make sure we pick the right mechanism then. We need to pick the right tool. So these are some of these questions that I love asking to really unearth this. Ministry leader, tell me the problem that you're hoping to solve by managing social media. What do you think that's going to solve for you? I'd love to hear what that is, because you may be right. You may be revealing a problem in calm, or you may articulate something that helps me know a better way to solve this problem for you. What is the problem that you're trying to solve by managing this? The next question, is there a better way to accomplish your goal? I love actually asking that to a ministry leader. Hey, so I hear that this is your goal. You want to reach people. If you could design any solution in the world, what would it be? Is there a better way that you could accomplish your goal? They may say things like, well, yeah, it'd be better if I could have all the people who attend my ministry for an extra 20 minutes after service and I can talk to them about stuff. It may be, it'd be ideal. I'd love to just have one-on-one conversations with everybody who's in my ministry. Whatever the solution is, whatever the ideal state is that they talk about, that's going to help you really begin to explore solutions that might be a better fit than the management one that you're talking about. So maybe social media is not the right answer. You know that, but maybe they don't know that yet. And so by hearing the specific goal that they have, you're going to be able to learn more of what the problem is they're trying to solve. And so you can then build a solution that's appropriate from there. One of the things I have seen time and time again with ministry leaders wanting to manage certain things that really should belong in calm, they have a short-term vision. And in a lot of cases, they have a single vision, meaning they want to promote one thing. They want to post one blog post. They want to post one social media graphic or video. They have one thing that they want to do. And so they're having this conversation about management, but really they only have one idea. So I love asking, have you developed a strategy around this? So if somebody comes to the table and they say, hey, Matt, I want to manage social media. Man, I love it. Tell me what you're trying to accomplish. Those are the first two questions. What are you hoping to solve by managing this? Love it. Let's keep talking. So now we get to the point where it's, all right, I love it. I love your ideas. I love the goals you're trying to solve. Tell me about your strategy. And that's when all of a sudden there begins to be a realization that, oh, what do you mean your strategy? Oh, I mean your strategy. I mean, what does it look like for you to have 7 posts a week? What does it look like for you to have 3 posts a week? Where are you going to find images? Are you going to be facilitating with a photography team? Do you have content that you have written? Talk to me about those things. That's what I mean by what is your strategy. What is the plan that you have in order to effectively leverage this platform? And then the follow-up to that is, how do you plan to sustain this over the long haul? So long term, what's your plan? Are you going to have a staff member devoted to this? Are you hoping that volunteers will do it? What happens if a volunteer leaves? What happens if a staff person leaves? What happens if you're too busy to do it? What happens if you miss a post? What happens if you miss 10 posts? What does it look like for you to sustain this? Because that is the key, typically, to these platforms being successful. I've mentioned blogs a handful of times. I can't tell you the number of times somebody's come to me and said, Matt, I got such a good idea for a blog for our ministry. Okay, cool. How many posts do you have written yet? I got this great idea. It's so good. Okay, cool. But beyond the one, what other ideas do you have? Oh, it's going to be so easy to come up with content. Great. Send me a year's worth of content, just either a summary or even a title. Wait, that's so many? Right, but stepping onto the treadmill of creating a blog means that you're going to have to be creating content over the long haul. I wish that I had done that all the time. Many times I just dedicated resources and we created a blog for them and then they posted twice and that was it. You want to be getting into this conversation about the nuts and bolts, the logistics of execution and support, both strategically and also with the ability to sustain over the long haul, over the long term. How are you going to sustain it? And then I like asking the question, what is the downside of comm managing this? And what's the downside of ministry managing this? What I love doing is I love taking it out of this, single pressure point driven conversation. A lot of times these conversations happen when somebody dropped the ball. The comm team didn't produce something that they were supposed to. They missed a promotion. There was a typo. There's something that's motivating this conversation. There's an incident that happened. When we have the conversation of what are the downsides of comm managing it and what are the downsides of ministry managing it, it really helps us kind of eliminate some of the bias that we're coming to the table with. So right now the conversation will be, well, the downside of comm managing is I just don't know if they're going to post reliably. Okay, well, that's extremely pointed. Thank you for that insight. But now when you force them to answer the question on the other side, what's the downside of ministry managing it? Well, I don't know what the downsides are. Okay, so how are you, I've mentioned this before, but how are you going to find images? I guess we'll just take them. So you have a photographer? No, we don't have a photographer, but I could just use my phone. Does it make sense for you to be adding photography onto your list of to-dos for the weekend when you're already busy? I don't want to do that. Okay, well, unless you have the infrastructure and support, that would be a downside. The downside of ministry managing this is that now ministry has to manage the photography team. It means they have to sort photos. It means they have to write content. It means they have to constantly be scheduling and updating, and there's a lot of implications to this. And so when we ask that question, or those two questions, what's the downside of comm managing it and what's the downside of ministry managing it? There are downsides with both of those solutions. So I want you to hear that. It's not like we're setting them up to say, wow, this is euphoria and this is awful. No, that's not it at all. The downsides of working with comm is that you're working with someone else. You have to work within the limitations or the bounds of a system that's being created. It means that somebody outside of your ministry is involved in posting content. Yep, that's a real legitimate downside. The reality is that the more people that are involved in a process, the more complicated it becomes. And so that's the downside of comm managing it. The downside of ministry managing it is that there's a lot of moving parts to this. And now you're adding those to the plates of either the leader of the ministry or other people within the ministry. That's really complicated. I like to think of it kind of like a restaurant. I know that may sound weird, but hear me out. Restaurants are notorious for being a very low margin industry. It's just really hard to make money. One of the things that's very important for a restaurant in order to be successful is to buy ingredients that can be used across multiple dishes. So if you go to a restaurant and there's one dish that features a particular ingredient, it's going to set up the restaurant for trouble because now you have to manage inventory on that singular item and it's only useful for one dish. That means that it's taking up storage space on your shelves, in your refrigerator, in your freezer, wherever you store that item. That's going to be a problem. If you bring in one ingredient, that can unlock dozens of other dishes. There's a real science to the way that so many restaurants build their menus. The reason that's important is because it lets you focus your ingredient list toward the core things that are necessary for you to be successful. Now, how does this relate to social media? Social media, video, graphic design, These are all wildly different initiatives than ministry. They require a totally different mindset, a totally different infrastructure, a totally different set of systems and processes in order for things to get done in a timely manner. So when a ministry begins to adopt some of these more operational-oriented services, it starts fragmenting their focus. And so this, for me, is why I'm such an advocate for having these conversations, because this is a little bit of a you don't know what you don't know kind of situation. If a ministry leader is adamant that they need to manage social media for their ministry, there's something else going on below the surface, and you have to get to what that is. Because organizationally, it does not make any sense for that to live under the ministry. Does partnership make sense? Absolutely, partnership makes sense. And I would never advocate that the comm team operates so independently from the ministry team that there is no overlap. That is bad management, bad strategy, bad leadership, bad comm. All of it across the board. You need to have a partnership with the ministry teams that you're serving. But if your ministry leaders are adamant that they need to have social media or design or video underneath their leadership, it means there's a lot of other problems going on. Now, as a quick caveat, I don't think there's a problem with ministry leaders being involved in these things. I'm actually an advocate for some graphic design projects living with ministry leaders. I think equipping them with tools is very smart and it's very strategic. I don't think that the communications ministry needs to be the single pass-through for everything. In fact, I think that is the fastest way to burn yourself out and is the fastest way to position yourself as a bottleneck for the organization. Partnership is so important, but part of what partnership looks like is you strategically defining these are the things that ministry leaders can own and run with. It doesn't look like full management. So I just want to make sure that that's clear, that I'm not advocating that ministry leaders have nothing to do with any of this stuff. Not at all. I am arguing instead that there is a partnership, it is strategic, and that management doesn't live with the ministry leader, but management lives with the communications ministry. And that is how I would answer the question. Who should manage this, comm or ministry?
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Healthy Creative Ministry Podcast. This podcast is just one of the ways Lunchtime Heroes can help you build a healthy creative ministry in your church. Stay up to date on the latest by signing up for the Creative Bites email at lunchtimeheroes.co.